This morning, Tommy Orange, who has just released his second book, Wandering Stars, following the breakout success of his first novel, There, which sold over 1 million copies and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Orange was born in Oakland and is a member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma. He has become a powerful voice for Native people, sharing stories of their past and present. More than 5 million Native Americans live in the United States, 80% of them in urban areas, not reservations. They have rarely gotten sustained or accurate mass media attention. But that's been changing in recent years, thanks in part to artists like Orange.
Please welcome Tommy Orange.
We've met plenty of authors who knew from a very early age they wanted to write. Not Tommy Orange.
I wanted to be a roller hockey player.
You wanted to be a roller hockey player?
Yes.
Growing up in Oakland, Orange was a sponsored roller hockey athlete. But that didn't last, so he eventually drifted into something else. In 2018, Orange released his first novel. There was a hit, telling the story of 12 Native people, each struggling in their own way, before their paths converge at a powwow, and all hell breaks loose.
A bad thing doesn't stop happening to you just because it stops happening to you.
Orange's latest, Wandering Stars, is both a prequel and sequel, focusing first on the infamous American Indian boarding schools started in the late 1800s. The schools, which operated all over the country for more than 100 years, have gotten recent attention.
Do any of them speak English?
In shows like Reservation Dogs and 1923.
I don't know.
Why don't you know? It was in yesterday's lecture.
Now, they're a big part of Orange's latest work.
When I first learned about the boarding schools, I was working in the Native community in Oakland, and it was something I didn't know. It's not something that you're taught in schools, and it's not something that my family ever taught me.
The school's practice of forced assimilation was developed in large part by Army Captain Richard Henry Pratt, who was a character in Wandering Stars. His guiding principle was, kill the Indian, save the man.
This fort represents a dark part of history. Captain Pratt went on using the tactics that he used here to start the Indian boarding school system.
At Fort Marion, just outside St. Augustine, Florida, that meant compulsory immersion, learning how to speak, dress, work, and even worship like the rest of society. The prisoners, Comanche, Kiowa, Arapaho, and Cheyenne, including survivors of the 1864 Sand Creek Massacre in Colorado Territory, were transported by train, often very publicly.
They had, in Indiana, there's 10,000 people came to the train to see these wild Indians. It's sort of like the spectacle of it.
Pratt felt the work he was doing was noble. The Native American community feels it was an attempt to blot out an entire culture.
Richard Henry Pratt was always sort of the villain, the figurehead that went along with the boarding schools. But the more research I did, looking at some of the policies that the U.S. government was making, there were worse men. And Pratt was working with that context.
Wandering Stars imagines those times and what's happened in the generations since. Most Native people have left reservations and moved into cities. That doesn't mean they left problems behind.
Addiction permeates both books. Why?
It's just been a major force in my life. It's shaped and mangled me in ways that compel me to write about it.
I was a boy and our family had just started to feel all right, like we were moving towards something bigger than we'd ever been.
There's this tendency to think that there's a weakness in us, there's a failing on our part. The reason why we don't have a connection is our fault.
Are you comfortable being the spokesperson for Native people?
Not at all. You know, I'm from one tribe.
But you have sort of become that.
Yeah, I mean, I have this position of attention, and I get asked questions on a big stage, and so I try.
But you don't like it.
I don't feel comfortable assuming that that's what I'm doing.
Orange may not feel comfortable speaking for others, but his work does. With his second book just out, he's already sold a third and has finished a screenplay. All after taking that unusual path to get here.
So how do you go from roller hockey to celebrated writer?
Yeah, I don't know.
There's no magic.
No.
Magic to it.
I mean, there were dreams, there were real dreams that died, and they sort of had to rebuild a few different times.
Okay. Well, good. I'm sorry, but I mean, I guess I'm happy those dreams to a certain, and the readers are.
Yeah, I'm happy that I found writing.
We are too. I asked Orange what he thought the biggest issues facing Native people today are, and he said, you know, there's so much. We talk about addiction there. A high school dropout rate is very high. And I said, how do you fix this? And he said, well, listen, I'm just an artist, but I tell stories. And one thing I think helps is when people see their stories told.
Always. Yeah.
And when they can see other people talk about them, especially on the scale. When his first book sells more than 1 million copies, it makes a difference.
And I know that you had mentioned the boarding schools. I've gotten a lot of attention in the past few years, but still so much more attention needs to be paid. And in sharing these kinds of narratives, it's how you share this history.
Yeah.
Really great story.